This circuit has a potentiometer hooked up to analog pin 0, and I have two LEDs hooked up. The red one is hooked up to pin 10, the blue one is hooked up to pin 11. And what I've done over here is I've started a code already. In this code I have some global variables. They're global again because I'm going to be using them in multiple scopes. I use them here, and I'm going to end up using them here in my loop. In my setup, things that happen once, I set both of these as outputs so that they can give off light so that I can send voltage to these two pins. And I have a serial.begin. Remember what that does is that allows us to start a connection so that we can eventually see what's happening on our Arduino. In the loop so far, what I've done is I've made a variable called pop pin, and I put a 0 in there. That's telling me what spot my potentiometer is plugged into. And then I have an unsigned integer pot val, and that is going to be whatever I read from my potentiometer pin, I'm going to save into pot val. That's going to be my analog number, something between 0 and 1023. Then what I've done is I have printed pot val. Now if I forget and I put in pot pin instead, what's going to happen when we run this code? I'm going to look over here and I get a 0, and I'm going to move this guy and it's going to stay at 0. The reason for that is it is printing what's saved here. And what is saved here is a 0. That's my spot that I'm reading. So really all I'm doing is I'm saying, can you print to the screen the pin that my sensor is plugged into? We don't want to do that. I want to get the value that's coming out of that. So all I do is I change that to pot val. And now you'll see that I'm actually getting values. And I like to do this before my code's all the way done. I like to see if the different parts are working along the way. I don't want to try to write this whole code and then see if I hooked up my potentiometer correctly, because then I'm not sure where my problem is if things don't work quite right. So up to this point, I know things are working. So now what we could do is we could make an if statement. And I could say if my pot val, if the value coming off my potentiometer is greater than 500, I want it to do something. And the thing that it's going to do is it's going to come into this scope and do something. What do we want it to do? Let's do a digital write LED red high. And I think what we'll do is we'll make sure that the blue one's turned off as well. So I'm just going to copy and paste, change this one to blue, and change this one to low. When I come into here, the red one will turn on, the blue one will turn off. And when I leave this, I want to do the opposite thing. Let's have the red one turn off and the blue one turn on. So the blue one's on because we're not in this if statement. Now, they both look just kind of dim. They don't look like they're working appropriately. You can kind of see when I move over here, it looks like this brightens up a bit, gets dimmer. Not working quite right. And the reason for that is when an if statement works, it only runs through it one time if this is true. So it checks this, and if this is true, it will run this chunk of code one time. It'll run this scope once. And then what it'll do is it'll exit the scope, run the next lines of code, start over, it'll check this again, and if this is true, it'll run it, but it keeps hopping out even if this is true, because this only runs one time. What we want to do is we want to change this. I want to make this a while loop. While this is true, I want it to continuously do only the things inside of this scope. There are two basic changes that I have to make here. The first one being I need to not put if. Got to stop my simulation. I'm going to change the word if to while. That's the first change. Let's see what happens when I run this. All right, so the blue one is on. Then I move over here. The blue one turns off, so that's good. All right, that's what I wanted to have happen in here. And now we can see that it's doing that consistently. It's not hopping back out and turning the blue one back on. And the red one's on. That's what we want inside of here. Red one is off when we turn it back. So now I'm going to turn it back, and nothing happens. It's not doing what I want it to do. It seems like it's stuck inside of here now. And what I've done is I've made myself an infinite while loop. It's probably one of the biggest problems that you can run into while writing a while loop. Now let's discuss why this is happening. What I've done is I've said while this is true, stay inside of this scope and just run these lines of code. It's just hopping between these two lines of code, just doing these two things over and over and over. It will come up when it gets to the end of this scope and it will check to see if this is true again. But we need to remember how our microcontroller works. What it's going to do is it's going to check memory to see what is saved here. So when it says see if pot val is greater than 500, it doesn't actually check my potentiometer. It goes back in memory and says what was saved in there the last time you told me to take a reading. And the last time I told it to take a reading was outside of the scope of my while statement. It was right here. Take a reading and save it into pot val. So it saved it, and it had to have been greater than 500 because I got into here. Now, even though I've changed my actual physical sensor, I haven't told it anywhere to change the value in memory. I haven't told it to take a reading and change it. And so the first thing that we did was we changed the if to a while. The second thing we have to do is we take the thing that we did to get into the loop, and we also have to put it inside the while. Think of an if statement as a door that only locks on one side. I need a key to get into it, just into it. But a while loop, I need a key to get in, and I need a key to get out. But that key is the same thing. It's the same condition. And so I have to change that condition to get out. I somehow need to change pot val inside of my while loop so that it can be updated so that this can eventually become false. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste. You'll notice when I copy and paste, I don't copy and paste my data type. The data type is the thing that, stop the simulator. The data type is the thing that saves space and says we need a space to save information. What we've done here is we're just taking a reading and then we're storing that information, right? We're assigning the value to that spot. I don't need to save space anymore. Space has already been saved. If I try to save space again, it's going to make a new spot called pot val. And now there's two spots. There's one that is in the void loop scope, and there's a pot val that's in the while scope. And it's going to get confusing. Which one is it reading? Which one's it updating? Which one is it checking for the condition? We want to be very careful not to use a data type again. All we want to do is we want to put a new value in this spot that was created, because that's the spot that it's checking. So now what it's going to do is it's going to jump into this while loop and it's going to run while this is true, but every single time that it goes through this while loop, it's going to check and take another reading, and it's going to update the value. As soon as that value becomes false, it's going to kick it out, and it's going to jump down to here. And as long as this value is false, it's going to keep skipping this scope, and it's just going to keep the red one off and the blue one on. And when this is true, it's going to stay in this scope, and it's going to keep the red one on and the blue one off. All right, so let's double check. The 200s here. So that means I'm outside of my scope. This is false. And as soon as I get to above 500, 511. Now, why did my serial monitor stop printing? Right? It stopped at 511. The reason is I'm not telling it to print in here. It literally will not do anything except for what you told it to do in here. If I wanted it to continue printing while in there, I need to put this line of code in there so that it will continuously print. But let's double check real quick and see that as I turn this down, see what happens to the blue. So I'll open my serial monitor again. I'm going to turn this back down. And we'll see as soon as I turn it back down, the red one turns off, the blue one turns on, and now we keep printing. So what I could do is I could put my serial print out here and in here. So I'll do that real quick just to see what happens. Now it's going to print on both. So now it prints after I get to 500. And you can see my lights are also changing. Or what I could do is I could get a little bit more specific. Maybe I don't want to know the actual value. Maybe out here I just want to say not in while loop. And in here I want to say in while loop. Now remember, if I want to type words, I put them in quotation marks. That's exciting, right? We're in the while loop. So now it's going to actually write out words. We're not in the while loop. 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 We're in the while loop. Woohoo! All right, back and forth. Not. We are. We're not. We are.